Australia exists as a world apart, a land where the forces of evolution appear to have conducted the most bizarre experiments imaginable, viewed from a distance. The continent presents an idyllic facade, pristine white shores, verdant rainforests, and coral formations that shimmer like precious stones beneath a tropical sun. Within the heart of the land, one finds scorched, golden savannas where the breeze is heavy with the scent of sap and earth, and the twilight transforms the horizon into a vast sea of crimson fire. A casual observer might mistakenly conclude that this is the final sanctuary of paradise. However, within this supposed Eden, virtually every organism has been shaped to exterminate. Deep in the woods, spiders lurk with toxins lethal enough to arrest a human heartbeat in mere moments. Beneath the waves, the diaphanous filaments of a box jellyfish deliver a death more rapid than any bullet. Even the translucent, sparkling brooks of the remote outback frequently conceal crocodiles that dwarf a motor vehicle in length. Data confirms that hundreds of fatalities are attributed to local wildlife in Australia, annually a toll far exceeding that of the United States. Despite a population density 13 times lower and the presence of world-class medical infrastructure, this serves as a stark reminder the wild here remains perpetually untamed. What makes this reality even more chilling is that modern Australia is significantly more benign than its own history. Tens of millennia ago, the first human settlers were forced to contend with lizards exceeding 7 meters, serpents as girthy as ancient tree trunks, and sprinting crocodiles. Yet, however terrifying those creatures were, they represent merely a tranquil interlude in the geological timeline. If we retreat hundreds of millions of years into the past, we arrive at an epoch where Australia was not a parched continent, but an immense inland saltwater basin, a realm where evolution deviated into insanity, producing monstrosities that defy human comprehension. While geologists refer to this body of water as the Eromanga Sea, paleontologists recognize it by a far more ominous title, the Kingdom of Monsters. Approximately 110 million years ago, the planet endured its most sweltering phase. With the total absence of polar ice caps, sea levels surged, transforming low-lying interior plains into shallow maritime corridors. As heated currents from the Indian and Pacific Oceans surged inland from the north, they converged to form the Eromanga Sea. Although the designation sea implies great depth, it functioned more accurately as a massive submerged shelf across vast regions. The depth measured a mere 10 to 30 meters, shallow enough for sunlight to penetrate the floor, where it fueled a perpetual mixing of algae and silt that rendered the water thick and chronically opaque. Its dimensions were staggering, stretching over 2,000 kilometers in width. The basin rivaled the total area of modern-day Japan. Had you stood upon its periphery, the horizon would have vanished into a frigid veil of mist, obscuring the boundary between the firmament and the tide. Curiously, despite occupying half the continent, the Eromanga was never truly balmy. Geological findings indicate that the climate was humid and heavily overcast, with mean temperatures languishing between 10 and 15 C, a surprisingly chilly environment for a tropical coordinate. Australia's proximity to the Antarctic Circle at that time meant that the southern reaches of this basin occasionally plummeted toward freezing during the winter months. One might assume such conditions would be too punishing to support life, yet the reality was the polar opposite. Primordial watercourses draining the mainland deposited vast quantities of organic debris and iron into the basin. These sediment layers, coupled with a humid, cold climate and stagnant currents, fostered an incredibly suffocating, nutrient-dense ecosystem. Populations of plankton exploded, enticing schools of squid and fish, which in turn beckoned gargantuan marine reptiles. The Eromanga swiftly cemented itself as the biological core of the ancient continent, a place where every cubic meter of water was a stage for existence and demise. Could one observe it from above, perhaps via a simulated satellite feed, the Eromanga would reveal itself as an endlessly gray mirror, refracting the pale, golden luminosity of the Cretaceous. The coastlines were fringed by swamps, mangroves, and sludge-filled plains where methane bubbled upward in columns of ghostly vapor. No other corner of the Earth hosted such a peculiar intersection of factors stagnant, cold, and immensely rich in sustenance. It functioned as an ideal biological broth for experimental evolution. It was within this cauldron that organisms began to mutate beyond all recognized boundaries. They were not merely amplified in strength or scale. They became fundamentally grotesque, with no constraints to temper the process. Nature was granted full license to forge forms that were as magnificent as they were harrowing. At the zenith of this hierarchy rose one particular entity, a colossal hunter that cast a shadow of dread across the entire basin, the Kronosaurus. Should you manage to transport yourself 100 million years into the past and step onto the margins of the Eromanga Sea, the absence of crashing surf would be the first thing to strike you. An eerie, profound stillness would define the air. The water's surface sat like a polished mirror, flawlessly duplicating the sky and clouds. Lurking beneath that frigid, silt-heavy veil, however, existed a domain where evolution had abandoned every traditional constraint. Adhering only to the brutal mandate might makes right, for the vast majority of inhabitants, the Eromanga functioned as an inescapable prison, a stagnant, oxygen-starved bath of cold, murky water. For a select few, however, it served as an uncontested Eden where they reigned without rival. Occupying the pinnacle of this lethal food chain was a name that continues to haunt the nightmares of paleontologists, Kronosaurus. Kronosaurus was classified within the Plesiosauridae family, while distant cousins to the Plesiosaurs. Their anatomical profile sat at the opposite extreme. A massive, heavily muscled torso, a short neck, and a gargantuan cranium gave it the appearance of an armored submarine. It represented the ultimate apex of marine reptile evolution for that epoch. A mature specimen could stretch 11 meters in length, tipping the scales at over 15 tons. With a skull nearing 3 meters, a dimension that eclipsed even the head of a T. rex. The lower mandible possessed such immense density that 2 grown humans would be required to lift it. Adorning those jaws were 12 pairs of conical teeth, each spanning 25 centimeters, with bases comparable in volume to coffee mugs. Its namesake, the Greek titan Kronos, famously devoured his own progeny. Kronosaurus mirrored this savagery, consuming anything in its path, including members of its own species. Power and endurance, rather than swiftness, dictated the architecture of the Kronosaurus. Its 4 immense flippers functioned as oars, propelling it through the opaque depths with silent, gliding grace. Because visibility within the basin was perpetually dismal, Kronosaurus eschewed sight, relying instead on a network of high-sensitivity nerves embedded along its snout and skull to detect the rhythmic vibrations of prey. Once a target was localized, it would lunge with a muscular stroke, clamp its jaws deep into the victim's frame, and execute a violent, rotational maneuver, the death roll, to shred the opponent's flesh, much like modern crocodiles. Excavations have unearthed Kronosaurus fossils containing the remains of large fish, sea turtles, smaller plesiosaurs, and even debris of dinosaur bones carried out to sea. These predators were indiscriminate in their gluttony. In the most harrowing sense, possession of meat made one a target. Biomechanical simulations indicate the Kronosaurus could exert a bite force of 27,000 newtons, 18 times the pressure of a Bengal tiger, sufficient to pulverize a human femur in a single contraction. To maintain such a massive frame, it likely required upwards of 200 kilograms of flesh daily. A metabolic demand that transformed the Kronosaurus into a relentless, non-stop hunting engine. Paradoxically, This insatiable drive often turned them against their own kin, traces of cannibalism, specifically tooth marks consistent with other Kronosaurus specimens, have been identified on fossilized bones. One juvenile, measuring 6 meters, was discovered with its skull intact, but its frame utterly mangled, almost certainly a meal for a mature adult. Distinctions between prey and kin were ignored. If it consisted of muscle and bone, it was sustenance. Researchers term this amoral superpredation, a pathological spike in predation, occurring only when ecological resources are severely stressed. Yet, within the Eromanga, true invincibility was an illusion. Kronosaurus occasionally encountered predators that dared to challenge its reign. Certain fossils exhibit serrated gouges that deviate entirely from the smooth, conical dentition of the Kronosaurus. These have been identified as the scars of ancient lamniform sharks, the ancestral precursors to the modern mako and great white. Sharks patrolled the Eromanga in teeming numbers. Most prominent among them was a species from the Cretaceous family. Widely dubbed the Ginsu shark, this moniker references the legendary Japanese kitchen blades. Known for their ability to slice through aluminum with ease, the Ginsu shark was equally efficient. Reaching 9 meters and weighing over 6 tons, it could strike at 70 kilometers per hour. Its maw was lined with over 200 serrated teeth, each 7 to 8 centimeters long, designed to carve through tough flesh. Their hunting style mirrored a hit-and-run ambush, a brutal strike from the shadows, followed by a tactical withdrawal, allowing the prey to slowly expire from exsanguination. Bite marks matching these serrations have been located on juvenile Kronosaurus remains, confirming that combat between these two titans was a consistent reality. Usually, the outcome was decided by the terrain. The Kronosaurus commanded the benthos near the seabed, while the shark dominated the open water column. They acted as dual icons of evolutionary violence, representing opposite strategies, one built on raw, crushing dominance, the other on cunning and velocity. The shark's efficiency likely relied on its ability to detect electromagnetic fields via the ampulla of Lorenzini, permitting it to sense the muscular activity of prey dozens of meters away, a distinct advantage in the murky Eromanga depths. Consequently, these sharks not only thrived, but claimed a dominant niche millions of years before the rise of the mosasaurs. Amidst this backdrop of perpetual slaughter, a different, fading group of creatures desperately clung to the fringes of existence. They had reigned as the undisputed monarchs of the deep for over 100 million years. Yet by the dawn of the Cretaceous, the ichthyosaurs were teetering on the edge of extinction. Within the Eromanga basin, however, small relict populations endured, drifting through the currents like spectral echoes of the Jurassic. Among these, the most prevalent was Pterosaurs. Stretching roughly 7 meters in length, this creature possessed a silhouette reminiscent of a dolphin, though its frame was far more heavily muscled. To facilitate speeds eclipsing 40 kilometers per hour, they utilized crescent-shaped tail fins, while their expansive ocular sockets permitted the tracking of quarry through the opaque depths. Their diet consisted of squid, fish, and juvenile turtles. A celebrated fossilized specimen even reveals a stomach contents laden with dozens of belemnite remains, an ancient cephalopod genus that had been ingested whole and unchewed. Graceful as they appeared, ichthyosaurs served as a somber reminder that biological adaptation does not grant immunity to time, though they persisted for several additional millennia by refining their long-distance hunting and rapid strike capabilities. They were ultimately overwhelmed by the arrival of newer, more efficient predators like sharks and pliosaurs. Indeed, Pletopterygia's fossils have been recovered bearing the distinctive serrated puncture wounds of Kronosaurus, proving that the former sovereign had been relegated to the status of prey. Not every inhabitant of the Eromanga scaled the heights of gigantism. Many opted for a strategy that was less about size and more about bizarre, lethal utility. Consider Clodocyclus, a fish exceeding 2.5 meters in length, whose maws gaped with the cavernous capacity of a hippopotamus, equipped with a jaw mechanism reinforced by elastic musculature. It could engulf prey nearly equal to its own dimensions, a technique seldom documented in archaic fish. By lurking just beneath the surface, they would anticipate the silhouettes of unsuspecting targets before lunging to claim them. Even more harrowing was Protosphaerina, an ancient, swordfish-like member of the Pachycormiformes family. Unlike the slender snouts of their modern descendants, their rostra were stout and short, bristling with teeth. Each tooth functioned as a flat, 5-centimeter blade arranged in a configuration akin to a chainsaw. With a streamlined body and massive fins, Protosphaerina could generate bursts of 88 kilometers per hour, ramming into quarry with the kinetic energy of a firearm projectile. Upon impact, those bladed teeth would shear through muscle and bone, bisecting the victim in an instant. Indeed, when these jawbones were initially unearthed, many experts misidentified them as the remains of carnivorous dinosaurs, a testament to the sheer evolutionary lunacy that permeated this region. Eromanga was far more than an inland sea. It functioned as a gargantuan biological engine, where every strata of life was woven together by the thread of violence. Micropredators consumed plankton. Larger fish decimated the small. Ichthyosaurs hunted the large. And Kronosaurus dominated the entire hierarchy when a Kronosaurus eventually perished. Its remains provided a feast for the teeming multitudes of sharks and necrophagous parasites patrolling the silty floor. No part of the cycle was squandered, as even the cessation of life provided the fuel for continued existence. For nearly 10 million years, the Eromanga functioned as an ideal evolutionary coliseum, where every tactical error was settled in blood, and every survivor emerged refined by the crucible of extreme selection. Researchers hypothesized that the intense environmental pressures here accelerated evolutionary development far beyond the rates seen elsewhere in the ancient world. Should a modern human descend into those murky currents, their final visual impression would likely be nothing more than a dark, silent shadow gliding past, swift as a nightmare within the Eromanga. Safety was an abstract concept. One lived in a binary state of either predator or prey. Escaping to the surface offered no sanctuary, for in this basin, death descended from the heavens. Australia's prehistoric skies were anything but serene. High above the waves, massive creatures with leathery, silk-thin wings spanning several meters patrolled the coastline. These were the pterosaurs, or winged lizards. Across the Eromanga fringes, remnants of at least 4 distinct genera have been catalogued, primarily from the Anhangreidae lineage, the final tooth-bearing aerial hunters. Unlike their later evolutionary cousins, they retained sharp, spike-like dentition specialized for securing slick fish. As they glided, these teeth caught the golden sunlight, resembling rows of jagged, bone-white talons. The most formidable was Tropeognathus mesembryanus, boasting a wingspan of 95 meters, roughly double the size of the largest avian species living today. Imagine standing within an ancient swamp and witnessing a creature akin to a gargantuan glider dive toward the water. Snatching a fish from the surface, each beat of its wings disturbed the silt, causing the murky waters to ripple in agitation. Because the Eromanga offered such a perfect confluence of steady winds, plentiful fish, and shallow basins, the skies were chronically congested. Dozens of individuals jostled for space, creating a spectacle that was simultaneously majestic and disorderly. A single miscalculated snap or a mid-air collision could send these giants tumbling into the water, where creatures like Kronosaurus lay in wait. In such instances, the monarch of the clouds was instantly demoted to the status of a floating buffet. Directly beneath these aerial hunters, within the submerged mangrove forests, lay another set of traps where ancient crocodilians lurked in silence. The murky water masked the presence of Confractuses, a primitive genus identified near Isisford. Its moniker, the broken crocodile, refers to the fact that its inaugural fossil was unearthed within its own gut specifically. Inside its fossilized stomach lay the remains of a small, herbivorous dinosaur. This finding confirmed that these creatures were not mere scavengers of fish or carrion, but active dinosaur hunters, standing only 2.5 meters long. Confractusus possessed jaw mechanics comparable to modern crocodiles, allowing it to latch on to terrestrial quarry with devastating force. They would linger in absolute stillness by the riverbank, waiting for small dinosaurs to lower their heads for a drink, before executing a snap that was clinical, brutal, and utterly silent. Sharing the same fluvial arteries that emptied into the sea was Isisfordia, a smaller croc relative roughly 1 meter in length that served as a niche scavenger, feeding on insects, eggs, and smaller creatures caught in the current. Experts believe these two lineages effectively pioneered the evolution of modern saltwater crocodiles, proving that this family had mastered the ability to transition between saline, brackish, and freshwater environments early in their history, a capability that remains exceptionally rare among reptiles today. Ironically, the very boundary where the river bled into the sea, the convergence of these two distinct worlds proved to be the most treacherous zone of all. There, any creature, whether migrant from the deep ocean or wanderer from the interior forest, was liable to be claimed by the next predator in the chain. Surrounding the Eromanga Sea, the Cretaceous period stood as a golden age for titans. Coastal forests and marshy plains served as the exclusive province of the Titanosauria, a lineage of long-necked giants that remain the largest animals ever to traverse the Earth. Fossil records identify at least 5 distinct genera that once called this region home: Diamantinosaurus, Savannosaurus, Wintonauditon, Austroposeidon, and the colossal Australodonton. The latter, known as the Southern Titan, could stretch 30 meters in length and hit the scales at over 70 tons, a mass 7 times that of an African elephant. They navigated the mangrove groves with ponderous grace, browsing upon ancient seeds and fern fronds. As they lumbered, the very crust of the earth trembled, and the tracks they forged measured 15 meters, dwarfing the stature of any grown human. Occasionally, an ill-fated titanosaur would find itself ensnared within the shifting coastal mire. Once expired, these gargantuan remains provided a windfall for the entire marine food web. Plesiosaurs, sharks, and even the Kronosaurus would swarm the site to feed. This phenomenon is termed an ancient whale fall by paleontologists, echoing the way contemporary whale carcasses sustain entire deep-sea communities. Within the Eromanga, existence and cessation were inextricably linked. Nothing was squandered. Not all of these prehistoric inhabitants were so benign, however. Patrolling the coastal undergrowth were the Megaraptoria agile, carnivorous theropods equipped not with rending petal talons, but with fearsome, oversized manual claws. The most prominent species, Australovenator wintonensis, dubbed the Southern Hunter, measured 6 meters in length and weighed roughly 300 kilograms. While comparable to a robust lion, it possessed vastly superior speed and maneuverability. Its defining feature lay in its forelimbs. Each hand was armed with curved, sickle-like talons extending 35 centimeters. Upon striking, it would lunge forward, bury its blades into the prey, and execute a violent lateral tear, potentially eviscerating a target's chest cavity in a single motion. Australovenator teeth were equally efficient. Recurved and finely serrated, they sliced through muscle with the precision of a chef's blade. Because their skeletons were composed of lightweight, hollow bone, they were built for rapid movement, capable of sprinting at 40 kilometers per hour over short bursts. If you were a creature of the Cretaceous and found yourself in its crosshairs, escape was virtually impossible. Although direct megaraptor remains haven't been excavated from the Eromanga Basin itself, fossils from adjacent zones like the Winton Formation confirm they stalked these ancient shores. When the disparate pieces of this world are synthesized from the Kronosaurus in the depths and the crocodiles at the tide, lying to the massive Titanosaurs and agile megaraptors upon the land, picture of a closed ecosystem predicated on violence emerges. True apex predators did not exist there. Rather, today's hunter was perpetually destined to be tomorrow's meal. The coastal canopy resonated with the cacophony of archaic birds, the thrashing of water, and the rustling of ferns that towered like skyscrapers. Punctuated by the gruesome crack of bone under predatory talons, had modern humans witnessed this, one realization would have become clear: nature made no distinction between sea, sky, or soil in the Eromanga. There were only two types of life, those that survived, and those that were consumed. Yet no empire, not even one forged by monsters, is immortal. After tens of millions of years of hegemony, the Eromanga Sea entered its final act. This dissolution was not precipitated by a predator, but by the Earth itself, roughly 105 million years ago. Global sea levels began to fluctuate in erratic, extreme cycles. Accelerating temperatures induced the melting of polar ice, which in turn fractured ocean currents. As a basin of minimal depth, the Eromanga became profoundly fragile. A single tsunami or shift in tectonic plates was sufficient to cause the sea to expand or retreat by hundreds of kilometers. Sedimentological analyses indicate that during this epoch, Australia was plagued by a series of catastrophic inundations. Rivers flush with red silt surged from the mainland, turning the marine waters as opaque as clay. Benthic creatures from fish and turtles to plesiosaurs perished as they were smothered by these dense blankets of sediment. Within a few short millennia, more than half of the basin's biodiversity was erased. Conditions ashore were no more hospitable. The lowlands circling the Eromanga morphed into massive, lethal traps. Many dinosaur fossils are unearthed in overlapping, chaotic piles, suggesting entire herds were cornered and drowned during these floods. Nature did not merely craft these monsters. It understood how to annihilate them, yet the water was merely the opening act of the catastrophe. From deep within the mantle, a subterranean force began to stir volcanism. Throughout the twilight of the Cretaceous, tectonic activity beneath Australia escalated. Lava surged from the south, while ash clouds choked the atmosphere, drastically reducing solar penetration. Massive volcanic eruptions physically warped the landscape, elevating Australia's continental shelves and effectively choking off water supplies from the ocean. The Eromanga Sea, once spanning over 2,000 kilometers, evaporated incrementally. Great lakes contracted, coalescing into stagnant marshes before transitioning into seasonal floodplains. The marine food chain collapsed entirely. The Kronosaurus was deprived of its hunting grounds. Ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs were extinguished, and the shark populations sought refuge elsewhere. Even the pterosaurs, which once commanded the firmament, were forced to navigate hundreds of kilometers just to forage. The disintegration did not occur in a flash, but through a long, agonizing silence that persisted for thousands of years. By the conclusion of the Albian stage, approximately 100 million years ago, the Eromanga Sea was scrubbed from the planetary map. Where an immense ocean had once churned, only desiccated, cracked clay plains remained a land where rain became a memory and the groundwater turned too brackish to sustain even the hardiest of plants. The watercourses that once discharged into the basin were reduced to meandering ribbons of grit, leaving behind only the desiccated remnants of a perished sea, scattered throughout the crimson soil. Fossils now serve as the solitary chroniclers of that vanished epoch. fragments of decayed shark cartilage, petrified ichthyosaur vertebrae, and the indelible impressions left by the final titanosaurs collectively narrate the same inevitable truth every empire, no matter how magnificent, eventually dissolves. In the relentless gambit of evolution, nature consistently reserves the right to revise its own statutes. Although the Eromanga Sea has long since retreated, its influence remains deeply etched into the modern Australian landscape. Those primordial layers of clay were transformed over eons into vast reservoirs of natural gas and petroleum, the very subterranean energy that powers our current civilization. Furthermore, many of the peculiar inhabitants of contemporary Australia, from salt-crusted crocodiles and aquatic snakes to singular amphibious reptiles, carry genetic echoes from that submerged era. One might argue that the Eromanga was never truly a lost ocean, but rather the fossilized consciousness of an entire continent. It stands as definitive proof that every act of destruction in the natural world serves as the preface for a new age. Sometimes the biosphere must fundamentally dismantle itself to facilitate the birth of new life. Once the Eromanga Basin evaporated, Australia was stripped of its maritime identity, evolving instead into a parched continent where time itself seems to have lost its forward momentum. Yet, within that sun-scorched, rust-colored earth, the spirit of the ancient deep remains dormant, perpetually anticipating its rediscovery by humanity. Today, the majority of that former seafloor is encompassed by Queensland, the Northern Territory, and South Australia, an expanse where gale-forced desert winds scour ground composed entirely of prehistoric sediment. Every individual grain of sand encountered here once constituted a sliver of shell, coral, or predatory bone, bearing witness to a time when the tides claimed more than half of the landmass. When researchers delve into the earth, they unearth far more than mere bones. They uncover a treasury of geological wealth. Oil, natural gas, and mineral deposits represent the harvested decomposition of marine organisms that perished millions of years ago. A once teeming biological soup has been refined by time into the fuel that drives human ingenuity. Perhaps no location on the planet articulates the symbiotic link between extinction and existence more poignantly than this territory. Many species currently thriving in Australia still manifest the imprint of the Eromanga era. Saltwater crocodiles, the undisputed monarchs of our modern aquatic realms, employ ambush strategies identical to those of the ancient Cretaceous, sea snakes, highly toxic fish, and the blue-ringed octopus. All exhibit evolutionary traits inherited from ancestors that thrived in brackish, shallow water habitats millions of years in the past. Even the genetic blueprints of select fish species populating northern rivers indicate that they share a common lineage with the dwellers of the Eromanga. In short, while the ocean has pulled back its reach, its legacy continues to course through the veins of the modern Australian biosphere. This, perhaps, is why Australia persists as both a biological paradise and an evolutionary purgatory, a theater where every inhabitant must perpetually reinvent itself to endure. When humans finally stepped onto this soil, they remained ignorant of the fact that they were walking upon the cremated remnants of a world dominated by monsters. The initial fossils discovered in areas like Hughenden, Richmond, and Winton shocked the scientific community, as they revealed a long-forgotten chapter in the chronicle of life. Today, when observers gaze upon the Kronosaurus recreations in museums or the colossal models decorating Queensland town squares, they aren't merely reflecting on a dead past. They are witnessing the planet during its most savage, unbridled phase. Australia remains one of the few places where the boundary between heaven and hell is blurred. From the monster-haunted Eromanga Sea to today's blood-red deserts, and from the Great Barrier Reef to the lush tropical rainforests, every facet of this land was sculpted by the same evolutionary currents. Here, Existence is not merely a struggle for the present. It is a memory of every previous cataclysm, utilized to forge a stronger future. If our Earth functions as a tome of evolutionary history, then Australia represents the chapters written in serrated teeth and jagged claws, with each fossilized specimen telling a tale of resilience, adaptation, and unrelenting terror. The Eromanga Sea may have faded into the shadows of history, but its reverberations continue to echo through the ages. Every wave that fractures against the Queensland coastline today perhaps carries the final, ghostly breath of those long-lost leviathans. When we peer into the pristine, translucent waters of the Pacific, we should remember that beneath that aesthetic beauty, the same ancient narrative is being composed. It remains a tale of the swift and the slow, the predator and the prey, and the unending cycle of life and demise. Australia, where the hellish and the divine in evolution become one.